So what we actually I'm going to talk about is how we can utilize nanotechnology in harvesting the solar energy and converting that to electricity. So first of all, for any project that's related to using the sun radiation, we should first make sure that we have the correct environments. And the correct environment or suitable environment means that how much sun radiation we receive in that particular place. In our case, of course, is Oman as a country. So I looked up the data available about Oman and how much radiation Oman gets. And this is what I found, that Oman receives approximately 3,500 hours of bright sunshine per year. And this one is too little, too much. I compared that to cities, major cities around in the area and also worldwide. And this is what I found. Oman, in terms of cities, Muscat and Dubai, actually, both of them came number one among 41 major cities in Asia. And worldwide, Oman, or Muscat and Dubai also came number 22 among 375 cities worldwide. So actually, Oman is a good spot for receiving sun radiation, and that makes research and development in the area of solar energy is very rewarding. So Oman is ideal, and of course, hopefully that will enhance or promote technology in the country in order to use the solar radiation and convert to electricity. And not to mention, of course, that this particular area is environmentally friendly. So having said that, most of the, or the major source of solar cells in the world, and including some in Oman, is based on silicon solar cells. And that's because it's well known and it's actually working. But it's very expensive, and of course it needs a lot of attention from time to time in terms of cleaning, because these particular solar cells are based on direct exposure to sun radiation, so it cannot work inside or indoors. And that actually makes it very vulnerable for dust and other kind of deterioration. So other emerging photovoltaic technologies are actually in the research and also development, and here are some of the promising kind of solar cells applications in the market. And I'm going to talk about the first one, which we are involved in our labs at Sultan Qaboos University, which is the dye-sensitized solar cell. Dye here means using an organic dye or inorganic dye combination between them, and this is the heart of the cell itself. But at the same time, we use also nanotechnology in here, as I'm going to show you. So this particular kind of solar cells, or solar cells based on dye-sensitized applications, they are based on using titanium dioxide as the nanoparticles as the source of capturing the electrons and then transforming that into electricity. And this particular kind of solar cells, they are known to be low cost, thin, and also you can shape it, which is not possible for silicon-based solar cells. And very important advantage here is that these particular solar cells are very efficient working inside or indoors. So that actually makes it very suitable to use inside buildings. It doesn't have to be directly exposed to sun radiation outside. And because they are very promising, there are actually some companies in the world that actually produce small modules. And one of these companies, the South Korean company, Dongjin Semichem, which has been producing small modules since 2012. So it's a very promising area of research and development. So how does it work? This is actually just a sketch of how it works. The cell itself has three major components. The semiconductor photoanode is the heart of the solar cell, where the electrons will be used for electricity generation. And the dye part is actually the start or the initiation of the electronic movement inside the cell. This is where actually electrons will be taken from. And at the other side will be the counter part or the counter electrode, where the circuit will be completed and then regenerated again, as I'm going to show you here. So first step usually is sun radiation hitting the dye itself. And the dye itself has what's called ground state and excited state. The sun radiation will actually promote one electron from the ground state to the excited state. And once the electron is there, the whole idea is to try to capture it very fast before it goes back again to the ground state. Because this particular stage, which is called charge separation, it creates the electron in the excited state, but there is a hole which is relatively positive in the ground state. So the electron will always have the tendency to go back and fill this hole and neutralize. So the idea actually is to capture it, take it outside, and then use it as electricity. So the second stage here is to take it to the conduction band in the semiconductor. So it has to be actually good communication or connection between the semiconductor and the dye itself. And once actually it's injected inside the semiconductor, it will find its way to the circuit outside to produce electricity, and that's called electron transport. And then the other side of the cell will actually help regenerating the dye by redox process, and then the dye will be regenerated again for a second cycle. And that's how it works. Now, looking at this particular model, in our labs at SKU, we work with the two parts here. Try to improve what actually is there already. Try to improve the semiconductor parts, the photoanode, and the dye itself. But because of this forum about nanotechnology, I'm going to only mention what we did for the electrode itself, because it's actually composed of nanoparticles. So titanium dioxide nanoparticles. So now I'll go back again to this one, and I'm just showing you here the excitation which takes the electron up. What happens, it's actually the counter mechanism usually. What happens if this electron goes back again without transferring? There will be no electricity. So the idea actually of our work in dye-sensitized solar cells is to try to understand and capture the electronic motion in real time. And in terms of real time means that we need to see how the electron behaves after excitation. And if we do that, we can improve the whole assembly of the solar cell. So in order to do that, let's look at this one in an expanded way. So I have the electron here. The sun radiation will excite it to higher state. What usually happens here is that this electron is extremely small. It moves very fast. It has a lot of energy. And what it will do actually first is to move in the excited state to get rid of some of this energy. We don't want that to happen. We need to capture the electron before it loses some of the energy. But this energy is lost, but it's not the final stage or the fade of the electron. No, it's part of it, because this particular very fast motion will actually lead the electron to what's called electron cooling. It will take it from a higher state to the lowest possible in the excited state still, but it lost some energy. That will be actually related to the efficiency later of the transforming sun radiation into electricity. Now, this process is extremely fast. It takes place between 100 and 500 femtoseconds. And 1 femtosecond is 10 to the power minus 15 of a second. It's an extremely, very infinitesimal, small part of time. So in order to understand or to see how the electron behaves, we need to look at this mechanism in femtoseconds time scale. The second process after, of course, electron cooling is the recombination, which is, again, kills all of the energy in the electron. There will be no efficiency here. So these two particular processes are very important. The second one is slightly slower than the first one, but still very fast. It's still ultra fast. It takes place in between 1 to 5 picoseconds. Picosecond to the power minus 12 of a second. So these two processes are very important to try to understand and see the electron, how it behaves in time once excitation is taking place. In order to do that, we need to have a specific setup, which is based on lasers. And this laser is called femtosecond lasers. We did build one in the chemistry department at Sultan Qaboos University. And this is a picture of the whole laser lab. And we can utilize this laser lab in this research, and we can look at the mechanisms of the electronic motion in real time, because it allows us to resolve in time shorter than 100 femtosecond and all the way up to 200 microseconds. It's a very big range, which means we can pretty much look at any mechanism in real time. So I'm going to show you here some of our results based on this research using the femtosecond lasers. First of all, this is what we modified in the titanium dioxide nanoparticles. This titanium dioxide actually is a nanoparticle, it's just like expanded, so it's about 20 nanometer in diameter. What we did, we actually modified the titanium dioxide, which is a photoanode, by adding a small amount, very small, tiny amounts of gold and silver nanoparticles. And what happens when we add nanometal to nano semiconductor, they actually stick together and they form a barrier. It's called Schottky barrier. This is very important because this barrier can trap the electrons and not allowing them to move or lose the energy going back. So that's actually very important here. It should help in the efficiency of the solar cells. So this barrier here is formed between the nanometal and the nano semiconductors, and we changed the ratio between gold and silver to see the optimization process, which one is better here. We changed it in this ratio. And so what we actually looked at, we looked at the two processes, the electron cooling, which I showed you, and the electron hole recombination, the two major ultra-fast processes. And in here, what I'm going to show you, among all of these ratios, only two ratios, which for simplicity, I'm going to show you the results for these two. The first part is for the electron cooling. If you look at this scale here, the x-axis is femtoseconds, and that's coming from our laser lab. And you can see that 100% gold is taking more time to level off. That means actually the electrons after excitation still have some freedom or degrees of freedom to move, to colloid and lose energy. Compared to 75%, you can see that 75% actually is where the electrons are more trapped. So we should expect to see more efficiency with the 75% gold in this case. And we looked at the second mechanism, which is the electron hole recombination, which going back again to the ground states. And in this case here, we probed or monitored electron hole recombination on the surface of the gold nanoparticles, just because it's possible and easier in our lab. So gold without any semiconductor and without any silver, compared it to when gold is already attached to the titanium dioxide and in the presence of different ratios between gold and silver. And again, I'm focusing here on 100% gold versus 75% gold, 25% silver, compared to pure gold, pure nanoparticle golds. And you can see here actually the electron hole recombination, which takes place in picoseconds. Compared to gold, gold itself is actually, it doesn't hold the electrons. So electrons are free to move, and they take about 2.3 picoseconds to relax back again. You can see the difference. When we actually used 100% gold, it's more trapped, longer time. 75% is much better. We should expect to see more efficiency for solar to electrical conversion with the 75% here. We actually measured the solar to electrical energy conversion. Now we're comparing this with titanium dioxide without any modifications of gold and silver. For titanium dioxide only, the efficiency we get is about 2.2%. Now, what happens when we add 75% gold, 25% silver, and the actually efficiency jumped more than 200%. Very interesting here is that the ratio that it jumped here is very close to the ratio of the electron-hole recombination slowing down, which means that this particular approach we are actually using and utilizing is very effective, and we can actually use it to judge on whatever we have, is it going to work or not, and we can modify consequently on this particular in the particular part of the titanium dioxide. So we actually tried to test, again, this approach on something else. Instead of titanium dioxide, we moved to zinc oxide, which is used also as photoanode in solar cells. And we did find this just different kind of measurements from the laser lab. There is actually low energy tendency when we add gold and silver. In this particular case, for zinc oxide, it's the 100% gold shows better results than 75%. So it's not actually a rule that we have to follow. No, it's basic, depending on what we have to test it first. And we did test the electron-hole recombination, and we did find, in fact, 100% gold is actually giving better efficiency in this case. So the technique is usually it's actually very efficient and works very nicely at the early stage of designing the cells or the solar cells. We can actually modify immediately before we go all the way and assemble the cell, and then actually it doesn't work. So what we are doing right now is we are looking at the solar cell spectrum, which is shown here. This is actually where the sun radiation is composed of in terms of colors or wavelength. We always focus on the visible parts, which is the maximum, but it's not everything. In fact, solar radiation or IR rays, IR actually is this part here after the visible, composed actually of more than 50% of the solar energy. If we can capture or harness some of this IR, that will definitely add into the efficiency, in addition to the visible parts. So what we are doing right now, we are looking at the gold nanoparticles that we are using. We know that gold actually improves the efficiency. If we look at gold nanoparticles means actually they are nanospheres, and look at their spectrum, absorption spectrum, it's actually in the middle of the visible, and it absorbs very nicely in the visible, which is a good thing actually, because that will be reflected in the efficiency. But what if we change the shape of the nanospheres to nanorods? If we actually have nanorods, there is an additional absorption in the infrareds, and in addition to the visible. So that actually will be very useful in efficiency. Not only one peak constant, if we change the length of the nanorods, we can actually even getting more and more towards IR harvesting. So that's what we're doing right now in our labs. And at the end, of course, I should mention that this project started about 3 years ago. And these are the students working with me. And we have collaboration within the college itself from physics, I'm in chemistry. And of course, not to forget the nanotechnology led by Dr. Mohammed Al-Abri. We have good collaboration with them. And the support for the work comes from Sultan Qaboos University, His Majesty's Strategic Research Fund, and from Research Council and Oman. Thank you.